Alright, how's it going? So we got this big fight on the weekend, especially for the UK, but you know, the boxing world in general is looking forward to this one. I am looking forward to it. And that is Chris Eubank Jr. against Conor Benn, right? Obviously their fathers fought years ago. You know, it was a great rivalry between Chris Eubank Sr. and Nigel Benn. Now their sons are going to fight this weekend. Yeah, there's some question marks over this fight, that's for sure. You know, Conor Benn, I think he's had 2 fights. His 2 most recent fights have been at 154. Before that, he was fighting at 147, right, welterweight. Chris Eubank Jr., on the other hand, has basically been a career middleweight. He did have a couple of fights at 168 as well, but most of his career he's fought at 160. And this fight is taking place at 160. So you would expect on the basis of that Chris Eubank Jr. has a massive advantage. But at the same time, there is going to be a rehydration clause. Chris Eubank Jr. is not meant to be over 170 the morning of the fight. Okay, so that there's question marks over that. That could impact his performance. But yeah, let's look at the 2 fighters. Chris Eubank Jr., he's had a decent career. You know, he's fought at the highest level, or close to the highest level anyway. You know, he's fought George Groves, Billy Joe Saunders, James DeGale. You know, these are good fighters. You know, all of those guys, those 3 guys I mentioned, world champions. So Chris Eubank Jr., he's fought at that level, and all those guys are bigger than Conor Benn. You know, all these guys that Eubank Jr. has fought, they're not only a better level than Benn has fought, but they're also bigger men, you know. So he's fought the bigger and better quality opposition, Eubank Jr. You know, so he's got that massive advantage of having fought at a higher level. He's got more experience, more fights, he's a bigger guy, more reach. You know, he's got all those advantages. On the other hand, he is 35 or 36, so he's near the end of his career. Okay, he's not a young man anymore. Early in his career, he was a guy that threw a lot of punches, was very aggressive. Recently, he's turned into more of a boxer, and I think that's to do with age, you know, and experience. Conor Benn, on the other hand, he's 28. Okay, so he's prime age. You know, he's at his peak in terms of his age, power, strength, energy, all of that. He's in his peak. You know, so that is definitely in his favor. Now Chris Eubank, as I said, he's turned into a bit of a boxer. You know, in recent years, he uses his jab a lot better than he did in his early career. He has decent power, but not great power. Neither one of these guys has great power. So it's hard to say who's going to have a power advantage in this fight. I mean, you would expect Eubank Jr. to have that power advantage, but Conor Benn, pound for pound, probably hits a bit harder. You know, like, if these guys were the same size, I'd say Conor Benn has a power advantage. But the fact that Eubank is bigger, you know, their power is probably on a, you know, is probably about equal. and also the fact that Conor Benn is in his prime and is coming up to 160 after a couple of fights at 154. You know, he can eat more during his training camp. He'll be full of energy and full of strength at 160. You know, so the fact that Eubank Jr has a rehydration clause where he can't rehydrate properly, that's going to affect him. That's going to affect his strength. So yeah, overall I'd say on the night in the ring, their power wise, it's probably going to be equal, or thereabouts, you know. But yeah, if Eubank Jr is 100%, let's just say that he is 100%, the weight doesn't affect him, the rehydration clause doesn't affect him, I would pick him to win for sure. You know, he's the natural 160, you know, natural middleweight, bigger, stronger, all of that, you know, more experience, fought at a higher level. I would expect him to win quite comfortably, you know, either a dominant sort of decision or a stoppage, mid to late rounds. That's if he's 100%, but I don't think he's going to be. This is the big question for me, and this is the big problem for Eubank Jr. This guy walks around, or is in training camp, and his father has said this, he is about 185 in training camp. While he's training, while he is in his best shape, he is 185. Okay, so getting down to 160, yes, he can do it, but then he's also got to refrain from eating too much, drinking too much after the weigh-in, so that he can weigh in on fight day at no more than 170 pounds, right? So typically he might get down to 160, then the next morning he's 180. You know, he's had a big meal, he's rehydrated, and now he's at 180 the morning of the fight, and then steps into the ring at 185 to 190. He can't do this time around. He has to weigh in no more than 170 the morning of the fight. So think about it, he has to get down to 160, and then while being dehydrated already, he's got to limit his food. You know, he might be able to have a small dinner with, you know, a bit of water or electrolytes, you know, Powerade, whatever, to rehydrate a bit, but he can't have too much. You know, a small meal and a bottle of water, that could put on 8, 9, 10 pounds. So he's got to be very, very careful about that weight, unless he decides to completely ignore the weight, and you know, the next day he's just he pays the fine, and he just says, you know, I'm not abiding to this weight clause, I'm going to come in what I'm comfortable at. You know, if he does that, then he's going to be good, you know, but there's going to be big consequences. There's going to be a massive fine, and we don't even know if the fight will take place if that happens. If he doesn't weigh in no more than 170 the morning of the fight, it could get called off. So yeah, if he abides by that rule that he can't weigh more than 170, I think that's going to have a big impact on his performance. I think he's going to be, you know, 60 to 70%. in that ring, right? Because yeah, when you think about it, he's killing himself to get down to 160. Typically, he'd be able to go drink as much as he wants, eat as much as he wants the night before the fight, pack on 20 pounds, or more. This time, he's limited to 10 pounds, so he is not going to rehydrate as he should, as he normally does, which is obviously going to leave him weaker, okay, less hydrated. The same clause Ryan Garcia had against Tank. Okay, he had the same clause. He weighed in at 135, I believe it was, and he couldn't weigh more than 145 the next morning. And we saw how Ryan Garcia looked. It was clear that he was depleted in the ring because he couldn't do his normal rehydration plan. Not to say Ryan Garcia would have won that fight or anything like that, but he wasn't at a healthy weight, put it that way. He couldn't rehydrate to where he was 100%. And now this is the same thing with Chris Eubank Jr. If he can't rehydrate properly and get back to 100% before the fight, that's a problem, and that's a big problem. So for me, that's the big deciding factor in this fight. I think it's the biggest factor of the fight, because if Chris Eubank Jr. is 100%, he wins. And I'm pretty confident about that. 100% Chris Eubank Jr. beats 100% Conor Benn. But, it's not going to be that way. It's going to be 100% Conor Benn against a 60 to 70% Chris Eubank Jr. So, it's for me, yeah, that's the big factor, and we'll have to see how that plays out. The way I think it plays out is that it's a very competitive fight. I think Eubank Jr., he's, because of his experience and the fact that he's fought at a higher level, he is going to be able to lean on that experience, tie Ben up, use his jab and control Ben to a certain degree. But lacking strength and lacking punch power, because he's not at 100%, I don't think he'll be able to hold Ben off as well as he would be able to if he was 100%. So I think Ben is going to get in there. He's going to rough Eubank up a bit. He's going to be landing some good punches here and there. Eubank is going to be landing the jab. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a very competitive fight. But ultimately, what do I think? I think that the weight clause is going to severely impact Eubank's performance to a point where he just doesn't have it in him to keep up with Conor Benn for 12 rounds. I think he might school Conor Benn for the first 3 or 4 rounds, but once the fight goes on and Ben just keeps coming forward and starts to get inside, Conor Benn is very good at getting low, right? He's very good at, he's got sort of, his style is sort of like his father's. He gets very low. He gets his head low. His head's on a swivel. He keeps his head moving. So Eubank Jr., even though he's got a decent jab, Conor Benn will be looking to slip that jab and get inside. So I think Ben will be successful in getting past Eubank's jab, especially mid to late rounds, and I think he'll start to take over the fight. You know, Eubank Jr, he's not going to give up, but when you're 60-70%, you know, your body's just not going to allow you to you know, his mind might want to fight Ben toe-to-toe and have a war, but I don't think his body is going to allow that. Not if he sticks to this rehydration clause. So yeah, that's unfortunately how I see the fight. I think it's going to be majorly impacted by this rehydration clause, to where Eubank doesn't perform the way he could, and I think Conor Benn is going to, as the younger man as well, the younger, fresher fighter, you know, with no rehydration clause and fighting at a very healthy weight, I think he's just going to have too much in the later rounds and, you know, get a decision win. I don't think he'll stop Eubank. I think Eubank will have enough in him, even with 60-70%, to really compete with Ben, even in the late rounds. Even though I see Ben winning the later rounds, I think Eubank will have enough to hold him off, you know, and avoid getting stopped. I just don't think he'll have enough to win 7 or more rounds in the fight. That's the way I see it. So again, Ben by decision. I think it'll be close, you know, 8-4, 7-5 kind of fight. Yeah, so that's how I see it. Chris Eubank Jr. at 100% beats Conor Benn, but I do think this weight clause will be a big factor and be the main reason why Conor Benn gets the win. Alright, let me know what you think.